My two cats are terrified. Zoran Mamdani has triumphed in the contest for the New York mayoralty. He has crushed the Democratic establishment candidate, Andrew Cuomo. He won over half the vote. He defied the opinion polls in doing so. And he's the first mayoral candidate to win over 1 million votes since John Lindsay in 1969. Come on, guys. Hope. The actual hope. All the time, so much of the time, I speak to you and it's all about despair and misery and death. And here is hope. In this age of fascism and darkness and misery and insecurity, there is hope. And that matters. The socialist left, the authentic, real deal, unapologetic, loud and proud socialist left, will now take power in New York City. New York City, the biggest and most important city in the United States. In an age of darkness, one of the great centers of the Western world has elected a socialist who stands against capitalism, against racism in all its forms, against genocide. This is a historic moment. The consequences will reverberate not just around the United States, but across the Western world and indeed beyond. There are so many lessons that we must now learn so that what is today New York will tomorrow take power at national level across the West and drive back the rising tide of fascism. We will discuss that, but just absorb for a minute what's happened here. Zoran Mandani and his campaign suffered the mother of all racist smear campaigns. Billionaires and plutocrats threw vast sums of money at destroying Mamdani and his movement. Donald Trump threatened the people of New York, telling him that he would financially strangle them if they voted for Mamdani. A mass movement which mobilized the previously unheard, the disengaged, the disempowered, the disillusioned, was the only hope of facing all of that down. A campaign of hatred and fear was crushed by a movement of hope and optimism. Let's just listen to some of Mamdani's victory speech.
Thank you, my friends. The sun may have set over our city this evening, but as Eugene Debs once said, I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity. For as long as we can remember, the working people of New York have been told by the wealthy and the well-connected that power does not belong in their hands. Fingers bruised from lifting boxes on the warehouse floor, palms calloused from delivery bike handlebars, knuckles scarred with kitchen burns. These are not hands that have been allowed to hold power. And yet, over the last 12 months, you have dared to reach for something greater. Tonight, against all odds, we have grasped it. The future is in our hands. My friends, we have toppled a political dynasty. I wish Andrew Cuomo only the best in private life. But let tonight be the final time I utter his name as we turn the page on a politics that abandons the many and answers only to the few.
A speech for the ages, a speech which put at its center working people, the working class, the people who create the wealth but who see so little of it, the exhausted, the exploited, the overworked. Finally, in the United States, the heartland of capitalism, a movement takes power which puts their lives their experiences at its heart. And as for the death rights, for the shameful, shameless, disgraced career of Andrew Cuomo, chef's kisses. I just want to note something about Mamdani's charisma, which is often discussed. Since Barack Obama, there has been no shortage of Democratic wannabe leaders who adopt the tone and cadence of the leaders of the civil rights movements of the 50s and the 60s, but whose speeches contain nothing of meaningful substance, just platitudes, homilies, empty, meaningless rhetoric. The sort of people who speak with the kind of rousing rhetoric of somebody who's going to take on power, but who in fact kowtows to power, to Wall Street, to big finance, to the big corporates and all the rest. But what powers the charisma of Zoran Mandani is a passionate and unbending belief in actually transforming society and taking on the elites on behalf of the majority. Note how he began his speech by quoting Eugene Debs, the pioneer of American socialism, because Mamdani and his movement know that they are the latest expression of the historic tradition of the left. I don't want to dwell too much on Andrew Cuomo, but there's a final thing to be said about that guy. Listen to his supposed congratulations speech from Mandani.
Congratulations to Zoran Mandani.
Pathetic. He still can't get Zoran Mandani's name right. Mamdani, not Mandami, which I think at this point we conclude is deliberate on his part. This serial sexual harasser represents the bankruptcy, the moral and political bankruptcy of the Democratic Party establishment, kowtowing to money and to power. He indulged racist, Islamophobic attacks on his opponent, and he lost. And disgracefully too, he tried to use Trump's blackmail to bolster his campaign. 2 days ago, he posted, if you want President Trump to try to take over the city, National Guard on streets, choking federal funding, vote for Zoran Mandani because Trump just said he will be coming and this poser, Zoran Mandani, won't be able to stop him. That is a fact. The next mayor has to be able to get us more, not ensure our demise. I am the only person in this race who can do that. That man conspired with a far-right demagogue, wannabe autocrat occupying the White House to subvert democracy, to try and subvert democracy with threats onto the scrap heap of history for the eternally disgraced Andrew Cuomo. Now listen to this from Mamdani.
The billionaire class has sought to convince those making $30 an hour that their enemies are those earning $20 an hour. They want the people to fight amongst ourselves so that we remain distracted from the work of remaking a long broken system. We refuse to let them dictate the rules of the game anymore. They can play by the same rules as the rest of us. We can respond to oligarchy and authoritarianism with the strength it fears, not the appeasement it craves. After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him.
This is so important, so important. Ever since the banks plunged the West into an economic crisis in 2008, from which we never recovered, the right has tried to turn struggling people against each other, to make people feel that they're forced to fight with each other for scarce resources, that they should treat each other as competition to be driven out, rather than uniting all of those who are struggling against the common enemy, the elites who profit at the expense of the majority. Indeed, listen to this.
We believe in standing up for those we love. Whether you are an immigrant, a member of the trans community, one of the many black women that Donald Trump has fired from a federal job, a single mom still waiting for the cost of groceries to go down, or anyone else with their back against the wall, your struggle is ours too.
What the far right have tried to do is to use so-called culture wars to divide people, to turn us against each other. Some have concluded that we need to somehow give in to this, to surrender ground, to throw minorities under a bus. But we don't need to do that. We just need to center a vision of economic justice that unites people regardless of their ethnicity, their religion, their gender, their sexuality, their sexual orientation. It's liberals who offer nothing except empty checkbox identity politics, where they're not actually offering anything meaningful for minorities at all. But they're not offering any coherent vision of economic justice for the majority. And they get so easily demonized by the right as a consequence, who then say they say to working class people who happen to be white, look, these people don't care about people like you. That's the same right who stand up for the oligarchs and the elites and who want to screw over working class people. Mamdani shows us how to fight back, how to build unity without throwing any minority under a bus. And he underlines too that fighting the rise of authoritarianism doesn't mean being weak and cowardly and supine, but strong, defiant, and unapologetic. Don't give an inch. What we're seeing here in part, by the way, and this is important, are the political consequences of the Iraq war, the financial crash, and more recently, Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. The invasion of Iraq and the financial crash helped forge the political consciousness of so many millennials in particular. And in the United States, the first major political expression of that came in the form of Bernie Sanders' campaign for the 2016 Democratic presidential nomination. Bernie Sanders did not win that, but he was only supposed to get, 1%? He was a septuagenarian Jewish socialist from Vermont. Instead, he secured 46% of the vote against what was then the most formidable political machine in the United States. But crucially, that campaign revitalized and rebuilt the US left. In fact, the US left became stronger than in any point in its history. One expression of that was the so-called squad, the leftists elected to Congress like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar. The Democratic Socialists of America surged to over 80,000 members, the strongest the organized left has been in the United States ever. At the local level too, a new generation of leftists secured power. Now, the Mandani phenomenon owes everything to that Bernie Sanders campaign. And actually, what we're going to see now are the consequences of the Mamdani phenomenon, and they're going to be much bigger. And then there are the political consequences of Israel's Western-facilitated genocide of the Palestinian people. We saw political and media elites facilitate a genocide. That's what we saw. And many concluded that if they can do that, and if they can lie to us so shamelessly about what is happening, what else are they doing? What other crimes are they committing? And what else are they lying about? Yes, the injustice is spawned by a broken economic system at the core of this mayoral campaign. But without the politicization driven by Israel's live-streamed genocide, I do not believe for 1 second that Mamdani would have secured the Democratic Party nomination for the mayoralty. The political consequences of the genocide are going to be felt across the West and, of course, way beyond for years, decades, generations to come. Indeed, listen to this.
The conventional wisdom would tell you that I am far from the perfect candidate. I am young, despite my best efforts to grow older. I am Muslim. I am a democratic socialist. And most damning of all, I refuse to apologize for any of this.
This is an age in which Islamophobia is rampant, acceptable, mainstream, respectable, normalized. And for a Muslim candidate to face that down in one of the main cities of the West, perhaps the most important city in the West, is so important. But he's right. He's a socialist, he's a Muslim, and he refused to apologize for any of that. We need to learn from him. Don't give an inch, don't apologize, stand our ground. That doesn't mean there are not big challenges ahead. Both Donald Trump and his Republican right and the Democratic establishment want Mamdani's movement to fail. And they will do all they can to destroy him and his movement. And that includes Trump trying to economically suffocate New York. And yes, even send in the troops. They may even try and remove Mamdani from office. They're threatening to deport him. Whether the United States survives as some form of democracy is an open question. And Mamdani is right at the top of the list for right-wing authoritarianism. The movement that Mamdani's campaign has mobilized will be so important in what happens next. And as I've said, Bernie Sanders' campaign revitalized the left, but this is going to have an even bigger impact. This is going to have a massive, drastic impact on the left across the United States and across the West. Now, on this side of the Atlantic, some interesting figures, let's put it that way, have tried to join in the celebrations. Paul Mason is a formerly left-wing journalist who abandoned the left, who spent the last few years demonizing and attacking the left while uncritically idolizing Keir Starmer. He's basically his only fan remaining at this point. He tweeted, Democrat Zoran Mandani, Nikki Sherrill, and Abigail Schanberger all swept to victory tonight. Trump is doomed. I'm delighted, especially for the New York City win over greed and racism. What an utterly shameless man he is. You can't celebrate this, Paul. You are banned from celebrating this. If Mamdani was a British politician, you would be demonizing him. Mamdani shows how to crush the sort of politics that you now represent. Now, there's an even more grotesque example. Wes Streeting is the ultra-Blairite health secretary who was nearly defeated by the British Palestinian candidate Liane Mohammed in the last election. He posted, inspirational campaign, victory for Zoran Mandani in New York City, lessons for progressives the world over. I'm not going to mince my words here. Seriously, fuck off. If Mandani was a Labour candidate, he'd have been purged and smeared by this Labour leadership. The politics of people like Wes Streeting approximate to the likes of Andrew Cuomo. What Mandani shows isn't just how we take on the right, but how we take on the so-called centre, the politically and morally bankrupt centre. Indeed, the Greens are now surging in England and Wales under their new leader, Zach Polanski, who is standing on an unapologetic platform of taking on the elites in the interest of the majority. Listen to him asked if he's the British Mamdani on Sky News.
Well, he's much cooler than I am, and I think it's important to know where your coolness lies. But actually, what I do entirely intend to do is the same relentless focus on inequality.
You're modelling yourself a bit on what he's done. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's interesting. We were roughly doing it at the same time, actually. So I think this isn't about one person's learning from another, but I think the left more generally around the world are going absolute solidarity with minority communities, with trans people, with migrants. But actually, the problems that are facing them more than anything is inequality. And inequality faces all of us, other than multimillionaires and billionaires. So let's talk about what we have in common and make sure we take the fight to the right.
Well, Polanski is showing massive promise already in his early days as leader. Here's what I think. In the mid-2010s, there was a first wave of a new left. Corbynism, Bernie Sanders, Podemos from Spain, Syriza in Greece, and so on. But with the left having been nowhere for so long, before its re-emergence, we didn't have the infrastructure, whether it be the people or ideas, and that first wave crashed. But a second wave is now building, and it did need leadership. And as Mandani triumphs, let's make this wave the wave that sweeps away both the rise of fascism and the broken economic system that produced it. Please like and subscribe, help us take on the dire corporate media, which will do all it can to drive this wave back and to stand up for the wealthy and corporate interests at patreon.com/OwenJones84. Do press like, subscribe, leave your comments, share the video. As I keep saying, I'm finishing my book, The Fall of the West. When I do that, we'll have far more stuff. But this is a big moment. Savour it. There is hope. We've always got to remember that. There is always hope. And we have lived through a dark era. And it's still a dark era. But we have something to build on. So let's build on it.